Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. What I want to talk about is everything that has happened over the last couple weeks and why I think there are really, in my opinion, 3 changes that have to be made going forward in this entire process. Now, some of it is before the bracket comes out. Some of it is after the bracket comes out. Because I think, listen, and I'm not Mr. Bash the committee. I actually think the committee, they were consistent. We can disagree with their consistencies and what they valued, but they were consistent. But I do think this is year 1 of a 12-team playoff, and I do think there are things that absolutely have to change going forward. The first thing that, in my opinion, has to change, what I believe this whole conversation, and it kind of goes against what I just talked about to lead the show. We have to stop valuing teams solely on wins and losses, and more wins equals better team. Now, like I said, I spent a whole segment saying SMU and Texas and Indiana didn't play anybody. But based on the criteria that the committee decided on very early in the process, it was clear. The more wins you have in a power conference, the more likely it is that you are to get in. And I just don't think we can think that way. I just think we have to do more critical thinking because, as Nick Saban said on the broadcast, he said, all wins are not created equal. I would add this, all losses are not created equal as well. And what do I mean by that? It is that if you just look at how teams were seeded and how teams were ranked, again, it was just who has the most wins. And, and so I look at, like, let me put it this way, right? Let's take out SMU. SMU's everybody's punching bag today. I think based on the criteria they should have been in. Let's look at Texas. Texas, as I've said 100 times, Texas finished the season, including the SEC championship game, 11-2. They finished playing a grand total of 2 teams that were ranked in the top 25 and went 0-2 against them. It was one team twice. It was Georgia early in the season. They lost to them at home. And then it was Georgia on Saturday in the not the Georgia Dome, Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So Texas went 0-2 against top 25 competition. And so I bring it up because, and I tweeted this out as well. If you actually, now listen, I'm not saying you should punish teams that make a conference championship game. But what I will say is you look at Texas and you look at somebody like South Carolina. There is literally nothing on Texas's resume that is more impressive than what South Carolina did, other than the fact that they have more wins and 1 fewer loss, but that's solely a byproduct of the schedule. And so to me, this is number 1. We have to stop overvaluing just strictly wins and losses. Look at South Carolina. South Carolina, to their credit, they had a couple wins over ranked opponents. South Carolina, to its credit, look at who they beat throughout the regular season, especially late. Put aside the fact that they were the hottest team in the SEC late. They beat Missouri, who's ranked in the top 25. They beat South Carolina, Clemson, who's ranked in the top 25. They have 2 wins that are better than anything Texas did. By the way, to be fair to Texas, 2 wins that are better than anything Indiana had. 2 wins that are better than anything that that Penn State had. So you go on and on down the list. And it's like, why is South Carolina auto-slotted behind not only Texas, SMU, Indiana, Penn State, etc.? It's because we value just wins and losses too much. Again, let's just stick with the SEC team so we know there's no pro SEC bias, right? If you gave Texas South Carolina's schedule, do you think they would have gone 11-2 like they did this year and go to the SEC championship game? Because I watched Texas against Arkansas. They didn't really move the ball. I watched Texas against Vandy. They had to rally. So now you got to go to Alabama. You got to go to you got to get Ole Miss and LSU at home. I think they're probably about 9-3 as well. And then the counter to that is you give South Carolina Texas's schedule. Well, a lot of common opponents that they beat worse than Texas did. They beat Texas A&M worse than Texas did. They beat Oklahoma worse than Texas did. So you go on and on down the list. I think that is one thing that the committee, when they get together next year, It has to be a deeper dive than just this team has won more games, so they have to be better. That's not how it works. That's not what we believe. But I also think that's something that you have to establish early in the process. It can't be you move teams around in the final week. It has to be, hey, early on, we start to realize that, hey, maybe Indiana's resume is a little thinner than we thought. Maybe we shouldn't just keep moving up SMU because they're beating bad ACC teams. Maybe we shouldn't just keep moving up Texas because they keep beating bad SEC teams. So that's change number one. Change number two kind of plays into this same one. It is the biggest mistake that the committee made. I didn't understand it in real time. We talked about it last week. I think it was a mistake, and they couldn't go back on it once they said it publicly, is that they basically acknowledged that nothing that happened this weekend for teams that were not playing would change their seeding. Now, you might sit there and say, Torres, why would the seeding change for teams that did not play? Well, the reason is simple. Take any of those teams, Alabama, Miami, South Carolina, Ole Miss, could be anybody, Indiana. Just because Ohio State, just because they're not playing does not mean that their resume is complete. So you look at somebody like South Carolina, go back to our shows last week. I talked about it last week when we were talking about the day after the final set of rankings came out. I said, first of all, South Carolina got zero credit for beating a top 15 Clemson team on the road 2 weeks ago. But at the same time, here's the other thing. Clemson still had a game to play. And so South Carolina's resume is not complete. The resume looks better because, one, you beat the SEC champ, or the ACC champ, excuse me. And two, you just beat a team that in Clemson that SMU lost to on Saturday. So of course, South Carolina's resume was not complete. And oh, by the way, they now have what should be a great win over Clemson and should be a punishing win over SMU. I keep saying it. I think South Carolina got screwed more than anybody, and I understand the head-to-head wins over Alabama and Ole Miss. I'm just saying is that they played a lot of tough teams. They beat a lot of tough teams, but I also think they just got screwed because we basically said that nothing that happens this weekend matters going forward. And so I think we truly have to never again say that the final weekend doesn't matter. I think it should matter for seeding. Listen, I'm not saying Texas should have been knocked out of the playoff, but again, if you actually look at Texas's resume, you can say we're not punishing them for playing Georgia and also acknowledge that with that extra game, that Texas's resume is worse than Tennessee's. Texas's resume is worse than Ohio State. Texas's resume is worse than whoever. Those are teams that are off the top of my head. Penn State, by the way, like how does Ohio State's resume not improve by Penn State losing? Like, how does Ohio State, I'm anti-Ryan Day as anybody, but Ohio State, he should probably jump over Penn State based on the fact that they beat him head to head. So that is change number two. Change number three, and producer Matt, go ahead and pop up the bracket again if you don't mind, because I do think my change number three would be something that everybody in college football is talking about. And it's something that I was a little hesitant to. I was obviously aware of, but now that we have the bracket, I think we have to reconsider. I do think we have to reconsider giving the 4 top seeds and the 4 first-round buys, as long as we have a 12-team playoff. I think we have to reconsider giving the 4 top seeds and the 4 first-round buys to the highest-ranked conference champions. And I'll be transparent. If you talked to me 2-3 weeks ago, I said this isn't a big deal. It happens in every single sport that certain teams in every division get some sort of representation, whatever. Look at the NFL. The NFC South stinks. Whether it's the Falcons, whether it's the Bucks, whether it's whoever, somebody's going to get not only into the playoffs and a first-round bye. And so I said, if the Atlanta Falcons could get a first-round home playoff game, I don't want to hear sympathy that Boise is getting a first-round bye. But what has happened, and this was something a lot of people have talked about since August, and I fundamentally agree with them now that we have a bracket, there is no doubt that the 5 seed and some of the other seeds actually have an easier draw than the number 1 overall seed. Oregon, think about Oregon. Oregon goes undefeated, only undefeated team in FBS football, wins the Big Ten championship. In the process, beats Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. I saw this stat. They're the first team in college football history to beat Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State in the same season. That's an incredible stat. Well, what's their reward? They get an extra week off, and then they go to the Rose Bowl where they're playing either Tennessee or Ohio State. An Ohio State team, by the way, that easily could have beaten them in Eugene in week 7 or 8 whenever they played. And so, listen, a lot of people have argued this, and I think there's something to it. You look at Texas's draw. Would you rather be Texas as the 5 seed and have to play early in the tournament with Clemson at home and then Arizona State? Or would you rather be Oregon and get Ohio State and Tennessee, or Tennessee in the second round even after a bye? And so what I do believe we should get auto bids. Okay. That is something that I think the gentleman who commented earlier was Corey, get rid of the auto bids. I disagree. I think that, listen, the reason we expanded this playoff, we wanted to get away from the regionality of college football. We wanted to include everybody. And so I have no problem with eliminating I have no problem with keeping the auto bids, right? Because again, every sport has auto bids. You win the AL East, you get into the MLB playoffs, even if you're an 81-81 team. You win the Big East tournament as the 9 seed. That's how they crown an auto bid, and the Big East gets an auto bid. But if you think, let's just think about college basketball. The difference between this tournament and college basketball is if Duke and North Carolina are the 2 best teams all year, and Duke gets the auto bid out of the ACC, that doesn't preclude North Carolina from getting the number 1 seed, getting a number 1 seed themselves, or getting a 2 seed. They don't automatically fall to the 7 line in the NCAA tournament because they didn't win their conference championship. So what I would like to see is the 4 highest ranked teams. Now, what I will say, I do think it would take some critical thinking from the committee to not just slot the 2 SEC and Big Ten champs, and then the SEC and Big Ten runners up, because this year the 4 highest ranked teams are the SEC champ Georgia, SEC runner up Texas, Big Ten champ Oregon, Big Ten runner up Ohio State, or Penn State, excuse me. I think it would take a little bit more critical thinking than that, but I will not argue that Oregon does have the toughest draw in this bracket, because I just think that's something that does have to be reconsidered. Again, maybe the top 4 teams get an at-large bid, or get an automatic bid. Let me say this again. The top 4 teams get the first round bye, but I still think we should have auto bids. I don't think the Boise and Arizona State are some of the greatest stories that we have in this 12-team bracket. But yeah, that's what I think.